Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome to Shifting Lanes. My name is Hanson. Thanks for tuning into the video. For this one, I'm sitting in the 2022 Volkswagen GTI. I just got done filming the formal review for this car, so if you want to see that video, please click the link up here. But I figure I want to take another shot at this car and basically compare it to my own 2020 Hyundai Veloster N. Because if you look at both cars, they're kind of like very similar. They're both 2-liter turbocharged engines. They're both front-wheel drive cars. They're both hatchbacks. And they're both, depending on the grade that you choose for the GTI, kind of similarly priced. This is the Autobahn version, and it comes in a 6-speed manual. So this one is about $39,000 after destination. You could also get these in the 7-speed dual clutch gearbox. So just like the Veloster N, you could also get an 8-speed wet dual clutch gearbox there. So very similar, and I want to compare these cars, between the looks, the interior, the quality, and the driving experience to kind of tell you which one, in my opinion, is the better car. Now, let's first start off with the Mk8 GTI. This is a new generation. Everything has been improved. The looks has been restyled. It looks awesome. Again, more details in my other video. And also in the interior, it's been completely redesigned. If you jumped in a Mark 7 GTI and jumped in this one, you'll think that this is a much more expensive car because all of these things look much more premium. And it's really all about the looks. It looks fantastic. It looks modern. But when you start using some of the things, like some of the user interface here, it's kind of awful. You probably watch a lot of video reviews where people complain about the user interface in here. It's true. It's the touch-sensitive haptic feedback stuff is not great. The steering wheel buttons on here, not great. I prefer to use physical buttons. And what I don't like about it is that when you hold it in certain spots, you could kind of accidentally graze certain things and hit certain things that you didn't intend to. But if you don't focus on the negative user interface, I think this is the best GTI Volkswagen has ever made. So with that said, let's get going and let's take this for a drive. I've got the 6-speed manual here, which I am so happy that I've got. They also come with the 7-speed dual clutch gearbox, and that is a much faster car than this, but it's pretty snowy out there, so I'm going to take it a little bit easy. And also this thing comes equipped with winter tires. The Veloster N that I'm driving also has winter tires that I've put on myself, so that's good. We're going to have a little bit of traction. As always, never drive summer tires on these conditions because it's just not a good idea. But with that said, let's get going. First thing I've noticed about the gearbox here is that I love the manual transmission, and I really like the second. I'm still in second gear. I'm going about 65. This gear is very, very tall, so that means that if you're a autocrosser, depending on the course, you may not even have to shift gears. So really nice tall gearing. The Veloster N is slightly different, and you'll see that in the second part of the video. But so far, the driving experience is good. This is a great daily driver. This thing has the DCC, or the Dynamic Chassis Control, I think. Anyway, you can adjust the suspension damping on this car. I can't change it now because I'm in motion, but you can change it from like a comfort setting to sport setting. So far, when the roads are nice, it's not too bad, but if it's a little bumpy, you're gonna get kind of punished in here. It is feeling a little stiff, which, I don't really mind because I prefer to have kind of like a stiffer chassis so that your handling performance is increased. Now, engine-wise, this is making more power over the Mark 7. I believe it's 14 or 15 more horsepower and 13 pound-feet more torque compared to the older engine. It's a small bump, but it's noticeable, and it just makes this car so much more fun to drive, so much more usable. I can't believe that a couple of years ago, this car was only making about 200, 210 horsepower, and then now you're up to 241. So, not quite the old Golf R territory, but it's getting up there. And when you compare it to the Veloster N, that has 275 horsepower. So this is really close to that. And you know, if you look at the curb weight, really closely matched cars. Now, back to the driving experience. Steering is great. This has one of those electronic power steering as well, so you could tune that as well. But I like the lightness of it all. You could increase the damping a little bit for that sportier feel. But I like the responsiveness of the steering. You feel like you're in tune with the car and the road. I like that. The Veloster N, very similar. Now, the exhaust on this car, it's not great. I prefer it to be a bit loud. If you're in sport mode, let me just go change driving mode for a second. If you go to sport, you can kind of hear that it's a bit more throaty, more aggressive. And if you go to maybe third or fourth gear, or 3 to 4,000 RPMs, you could kind of hear that slight pop pop in the back. You'll hear it more with the windows down, but I'm gonna keep the windows up for now. You've got more sound piped into the cabin here. I really don't mind that because almost every car does it. You'll find that the Veloster N does that as well. But I wish that the exhaust sounded a bit more aggressive in this car. But yeah, going through these back roads, the GTI feels nicely planted. You know, I'm not going too fast on these roads because it is, the weather's not that great. But some cars just have like this numb steering feel, but this one, you know, you feel connected to the road. And I love that about this car. Now let's talk pricing for a second because this is the Autobahn. Now the Autobahn comes with all the bells and whistles. You know, it's got the light bar up front, it's got the LED lighting everywhere, it's got lots of ambient lighting in here, which is really cool. You know, ambient lighting doesn't add any horsepower, but it adds to the driving experience. And I like how you could just, you know, personalize your car that way. Currently, I'm in this desire mood, and I could change it to eternity, and you get like this green theme, or infinity. It's kind of like a more sporty, fiery, and more lively theme. Anyway, you could change those things on the fly, which is kind of cool. But with the Autobahn trim, you know, you get like heated seats, not just for the front, but also in the back. So this is great for like daily driving stuff. And of course, you've got fully digital instrument cluster, which is, you can actually buy it in the S trim, which is awesome. And you know, that makes the car look much more expensive. But if you go down to the SE trim, I believe that's around $34,000, so it's slightly more expensive than the Veloster N. You know, that's probably the sweet spot. That's the GTI that I would recommend because it still has the heated front seats, it's got that light bar in the front, it's got the LED lighting, and I think you could get cloth seats with that, which I actually prefer the cloth seats because it looks more interesting, whereas in this one you've got the leather seating. It looks cool, but I prefer that pattern that you can find in the cloth seats. It's more traditional GTI. And then the base GTI, which is the S, that starts at $29,000 for the manual. And you know, that's actually cheaper than the Veloster N. So that's the more economical choice. Let's go back to the driving for a second. The turbocharger in here, it just makes this car much more fun to drive. Turbo lag is minimal. Brakes are really good. If you like autocrossing, this is a great autocross weapon. When I was autocrossing, I saw a lot of these guys, and this one is a nice improvement. And I'm curious how this is going to be classed versus the Mark 7 GTI, because this is making more power. And also, I'm curious how the manual transmission is going to be classed versus the dual clutch version, because the dual clutch gearbox version is faster. But this thing is such a delight, man. I just love driving this car. If you're thinking about buying this as a daily driver, go for it. You know, this is great. And on the weekends, you could take it to the track, or you could take it autocrossing or whatever. But I really like this car. And it looks awesome inside and out. But with that said, let's switch on over to the Veloster N and see how that drives. Okay, so now we're in the 2020 Hyundai Veloster N, and let's first talk about the design real quick, because obviously this is a 3-door hatchback. It's a very unique car in that this is the only 3-door car that you could buy. And the 3-door aspect, it's really not a big deal for me. Obviously, it's less convenient than having an actual 4th door. I like the look of the car from the left-hand side because it gives it that coupe-like look. And that's the one thing that's really missing from the Volkswagen GTI lineup, is that there's no more 2-door hatchback look. They stopped selling it around 2017, I believe. But looks-wise, the reason why I got this Veloster N is because I thought the Civic Type R looked too crazy. And compared to the Volkswagen GTI, this thing looks pretty crazy. This has the special red trim pieces all around. It has a crazier looking spoiler, and the side skirt also looks more aggressive. And the rear diffuser also looks very boy racer. So if you're trying to keep a lower profile, then the Volkswagen GTI is probably the car that you should get. But the Veloster N looks much more fun. Now on the interior, this is more plastic fantastic in here, but the one thing that I do like about it is that there's physical buttons and dials in here like a traditional car, and I like that so much more because it's just much more user friendly. And the user infotainment system on this thing is the older style. If you look at newer Hyundais, and I'll link to some videos up here, but if you look at the new Hyundai infotainment system, it just looks more classy, whereas this one, there's really no problem with this one. It's a little bit slower, but it works. The instrument cluster is also more of a traditional look. It's got 2 gauges, tach on the left, speedometer on the right, and an electronic display right down the center. It doesn't look as premium as the GTI, so 1 notch down for the Veloster N in the interior department. Also, let's talk about pricing real quick, because I bought this car in 2020 and I bought it for $29,000. This is the one with the performance pack. The pricing has changed a lot. You can't get it for that cheap anymore. For the 2022 model year, the Veloster N is just a single trim, and it starts at $32,500, and it comes with the manual transmission. You could pay a little bit more to get the 8-speed wet dual clutch transmission. What's with the price difference between that one and this one? I have another video that explains all that you get, and you can see it up here. But basically, a lot more safety systems in the newer Veloster Ns, and also the seats are so much better in the newer one. Stuff like blind spot monitoring. You can see here I don't have a blind spot monitoring system. And then like adaptive cruise control. That newer car has all those vehicle smarts. This one is just much more bare bones. But mechanically speaking, you still have the same great stuff. You have the electronic limited slip differential, you've got the 2-liter turbocharged engine, you've got the better engine tuning to give you that 275 horsepower and 260 pound-feet of torque. Of course, if you go with the dual clutch transmission, that's even faster, because there's an overboost function called N-grin shift, and that bumps up the torque by, I think, another 7%. So it's a very marginal bump, but it's a really cool feature, and that's really a good reason why you should get the DCT over the manual. The newer Veloster Ns is really still cheaper than the SE trim of the Volkswagen GTI, and it's definitely a lot cheaper than the Autobahn trim that I tested in this video, because that is $39,000. So pricing wise, the Veloster N is still a bargain. Now that's given that you can find one of these things at MSRP. I know we're living through very weird times, because the resale value of my car, which is a 2020 with the performance pack, at the amount of miles that I have right now, which is still surprisingly under 5,000 miles, because I don't get to drive these cars very often because I'm driving all the different cars. But the price of this car is probably about 6 to 7 grand more expensive than when I bought it. And that seems to be the case for performance cars across the board. You're just paying so much more for it just because the supply is very low. But I think once things normalize a little bit more, I don't really know what's going to happen. But anyway, pricing wise, this is still cheaper than the Volkswagen GTI, so a win for the Veloster N there. With that said, let's get going, because I'm really looking forward to driving this thing, because this thing has only 5,000 miles. I don't really get to drive my own car very often. So let's go ahead and go. Okay, so the first thing is that there's different driving modes on this car. So if you look at the steering wheel, there's this checkered flag button that engages N mode. And when you put it into N mode, so many things happen. First, you get that crazy pop in the back. It's great. And then there's also adaptive suspension here, so you could, or adaptive damping, so you could also stiffen up the suspension. When you put it into N mode, it goes to the stiffest setting. And unlike in the GTI, where the suspension goes from firm to just slightly less firm, in this mode, when you go into normal, it's comfortable, and then when you go into N mode, it's very uncomfortable. This is very stiff, but it's great when you're trying to carve corners. The handling just is improved so much more just because of this adaptive damping. When you go into N mode, the throttle response is also more sharp, and then the exhaust, it makes those crazy sounds. That's the one thing that I really love about the Veloster N. Is the noise. So this thing can kind of simulate that whole anti-lag feature, which it basically delays combustion so that it occurs slightly outside of the cylinders, so that you can accelerate those gases to spin that turbo. And so when you're changing gears, it keeps up the turbo boost so that you don't lose as much momentum. But yeah, my favorite part of the Veloster N is the exhaust. I haven't touched the exhaust at all. There's very few things that I've modified in this car. The first one is the air intake, very basic modification. But yeah, haven't touched the exhaust, and I love how just from the factory it can sound so crazy. And then what I also like is that when you lift off the throttle, you hear all this burble. In the Volkswagen GTI, you hear it very slightly. It's more pronounced here, and I like it so much more. Now, handling wise, you know, it's a little snowy outside, so I don't really want to push this car too much, but I believe that the handling is a little bit better with the Veloster N. The steering just feels more sharp. Like the turn-in is just like so much more immediate. And I just feel more connected to the road in the Veloster N versus the Volkswagen GTI. Now, both of these cars are on winter tires currently, and yeah, don't drive on the summer tires that you get with these cars. So handling isn't as good as what it could be, but still, this car feels fantastic, even with the winter tires that I have on right now. Let's talk about gearing for a second. The gear shifter feels much more clicky in the Veloster N, and I like that. The gear shifter is also placed a little bit lower, so like it feels more short. It's great because you don't spend a lot of travel to change gears, whereas in the Volkswagen GTI, it sits a little bit taller, so you could reach it more conveniently, I guess, more quickly. But yeah, there is a little bit more travel there. Gearing wise, I think the Volkswagen GTI is a little bit more daily driver friendly, and also the fact that it's super tall, like I mentioned before, you could go up to like almost 70 miles per hour in second gear, whereas in this one it like tops out at around 50 miles per hour. So again, if you're auto crossing, you're doing a little bit more work here with the transmission. So right now, let's go down to second gear. Going all the way up, and you can see the rev limiter is right there, and I'm at 55, and I have to shift up. So pretty big difference in gearing. Volkswagen GTI, more user-friendly in my opinion. But they're both really fun to drive, and I like how both of them have dual clutch transmissions as well. The Veloster N has the 8-speed dual clutch transmission. Again, having driven that car, I've driven 2 of those. It feels fantastic. And I usually recommend the manual over the automatic, and well, actually in this case I still recommend the manual version, but the dual clutch version of the Veloster N kind of puts a unique twist on it because there's a bunch of other features like the N-grin shift, the N-track sense, and other marketing related things. But the fact that there's a dual clutch transmission in there kind of allows the engineers to do more awesome things with the tuning. So it could sense like your throttle positioning, like how aggressively you're driving. So it can make the shifting action more aggressive if you need it to be. So because of that, and also the overboost function in the dual clutch Veloster N, that car just feels very different than the manual transmission. It makes it more like kind of like it gives you like this video game feel when you're driving that thing. I like how with N-grin shift, it gives you like 20 seconds of making more power before it has to kind of like recharge. So basically that's to protect the turbocharger from getting damaged from like overheating because you're making more torque or because there's more boost in there. So I think right now is conclusion time. Which one do I like better? Volkswagen GTI or the Veloster N? I still like the Veloster N better because this thing feels more raw. It reminds me a lot of my old Mitsubishi Evo 9. This is a front-wheel drive, and that's an all-wheel drive car, of course, but 2 totally different things. But that car just felt so raw, and it was so much fun to drive. And this kind of reminds me a lot of that. This thing has so much character. The exhaust sounds so much better that I just love just making this do the gunfire sounds. It just puts a big smile to my face. Let's just do that right now. I mean, that, like, you can't put a price on that. Well, you can. You could buy a Veloster N and you could do that all the time. That just feels so great. And just because of that reason, I would go with the Veloster N. Performance-wise, they kind of feel very similar. I believe the 0 to 60 times, this is slightly quicker. Curb weight is about the same, so this has a little bit better power to weight ratio. It certainly feels more raucous with this car, whereas the Volkswagen GTI feels more refined. And that seems to be the theme between these 2 cars. This Veloster N is just the more rough around the edges, more eager to drive. It feels like there's a bit more torque steer in the Veloster N. So yeah, this is the less refined version of the Volkswagen GTI. So if I was a different person looking for other things like a nicer driving experience, a more luxurious interior, then the Volkswagen GTI is the one that I would go with. The Veloster N will get you more value for your dollar. I think you get a better manual transmission. There's a lot of safety features in that as well. And visually, I think the Veloster N looks a lot better. On the interior, if you don't like any of that haptic feedback stuff, you're gonna like the buttons and dials in here. The Volkswagen GTI just feels and looks like a much more modern car. And if that's what you're looking for, then you should absolutely go with the Volkswagen GTI. The Autobahn version is about $39,000. That's pretty expensive considering that I think for another $5,000 you can get the Golf R. And hopefully when I do get the Golf R to test, I could do another one of these comparisons, because at that point, it's now a different story, because the Golf R is another 2-liter turbocharged engine, but that one makes 315 horsepower and it has all-wheel drive and it has drift mode. So kind of hard to spend $40,000 on a Volkswagen GTI when I know that if I spend another $5,000, I can get that Golf R? Or if I have a budget of less than $35,000, I can get this, which is, I think, the better deal. Well, there you have it. I think that's your answer. In my opinion, I would go with the Veloster N. I would always choose this 9 times out of 10, just because I think this is a much more fun car to drive compared to the Volkswagen GTI. In terms of like fun factor, if I gave this a 10 out of 10, I think the Volkswagen GTI is probably like an 8 out of 10. But that's just me. Please let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'm gonna wrap it up right there. I wanna thank you so much for watching this special feature comparison. If you wanna see more stuff like this one, please let me know in the comments below. And if you learned something new, hit that like button, hit that subscribe and that notification bell so that you can be notified anytime we make a new video. And don't forget, we also have a second channel. It's called Shifting Lanes 2, and that channel is going to have all the other videos that we used to have on this channel. So if you want to follow our project cars, so actually stuff like the Veloster N, you can head on over there and watch the videos over there. Shifting Lanes is going to be reserved for car reviews and comparisons just like this one. So if you like to see stuff like that, please subscribe. With that said, I'm going to wrap it up right there. I want to thank you so much for watching all the way till the end. This has been a comparison between the Volkswagen GTI and the Veloster N. My name's Hanson, and I'll see you next time.